We're warned that Christianity will disappear from Iraq and Syria, places where Christians have lived since the religion began, within 1 or 2 generations. Why is the West largely indifferent to the fate of Christians in the Middle East? The forced toppling of secular regimes in the region have been a catastrophe for the followers of Christ. To CrossTalk, Christians in the Middle East. I'm joined by my guest, Ibn Thranholm in Copenhagen. She's an acclaimed Danish journalist who examines political events through the prism of religion. In London, we have Reverend Nadim Nasser. He is the director of the Awareness Foundation. And here in Moscow, we cross to Jeffrey Taylor. He is a contributing editor at The Atlantic and author of 7 books, most recently, Topless Jihadis. All right, CrossTalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Ibn, if I can go to you first in Copenhagen. You're an expert on religion, and I know that you've written extensively about the fate of religion, particularly Christianity in Europe. Why do you think, in your opinion, the West is largely indifferent? There are individuals like yourself and other websites and awareness groups that we'll hear, but largely in the mainstream, Christians are, for the most part, forgotten. They're not part of a bigger story. Go ahead, Ibn in Copenhagen.
I don't think the problem can be understood only by a kind of political and economic framework. Without a spiritual perspective, you won't get the full picture. The Western political and cultural elite has rejected faith in God. And they are actually worshipping a kind of false religion, a kind of idol. And they have created a sort of new religion, which is liberal democracy. And the essence of liberal democracy is to reject the faith in God. Not God in the broad sense, but faith in the Christian God, I mean the biblical God. So the goal is for the liberal democracy actually to destroy, to deconstruct, and to desecrate the Christian faith. And now we're talking about persecution of Christians in the Middle East, but it's also going on right here in Europe and also in the United States. And here, I mean, Christian symbols are taken out of the public places, and when Christians talk openly about the faith, they get mocked, they get ridiculed, they get labeled as kind of unintelligent. They are marginalized culturally and isolated socially.
Well, okay, Ibn, I mean, that's the case in Europe, but I mean, if I want to stick with the Middle East here, if I had to go to Reverend Nadim here, I mean, whole communities, ancient communities, let me go to London here, ancient communities are being destroyed. When we had secular regimes, even if they were brutal dictators, these religious minorities remained intact, and they have been for time immemorial, and that's all coming to an end very quickly. I mean, I pointed out, there are a number of experts that believe that within 2 generations, Christianity could be completely gone from the Middle East, where it was born. Go ahead, Reverend.
I think, yes, we are on the way to vanish from the Middle East. And there is a total indifference in the West about what is happening to Christianity in the Middle East, because the interest is not about religion. Yes, the spiritual side is there and important, but also what is happening in the West is the political side and the economic side. Here, they follow their interests. The ignorance is phenomenal about Christianity in the Middle East. Peter, they still ask me after 18 years of being in this country, in the UK, in London, Father, when did you become Christian? Because they think I was a Muslim and I became Christian. And when I say, well, I've been always a Christian, they say, oh, well, your parents became Christian. That far they can go, but nothing further. So we were invisible before the conflict in Iraq and Syria. The people here are unaware that we exist. They think Christ was born under Big Ben. Yeah,
Reverend, if I could just point out here, I mean, being invisible wasn't such a bad thing. I mean, because nobody bothered you, okay? Now you're very visible. Very visible right now. Okay, Jeffrey, if I can go to you. I mean, it's really interesting, irrespective if you're religious or not, it is interesting historically that, Christianity did come from the Middle East, did come from this region here. here, and it became the religion of the West. It's the West now is intensely secular. But why isn't there any kind of even historical sympathy to the roots of Western civilization in protecting Christians? I mean, you could look at it from that point of view. And on top of it, in the West, in Europe, and particularly in the United States right now, people are very touchy about how you talk about Islam, but nobody talks about Christianity. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I actually do see commentary about Christianity and the loss of the reduction of number of Christians in the Middle East, and in commentary on the right in the United States. And I follow the media intensely in Italy and France, and both of there are segments of the media there that do talk about the fate of the Christians, who are like most of the populations of the countries where secular regimes have been overthrown, are suffering. So I would disagree with what Ibn said about the goal of liberal democracy being to destroy religion. The idea is secularism, and if we hadn't overthrown Saddam Hussein in Iraq, we would have had a secular dictator or a secular regime that would have protected the Christians who have been living there since the beginning of Christianity. And the same would be true if Assad were to suddenly leave in Syria, where there are a million and a half Christians who would be immediately forced to flee or possibly be massacred.
Okay, Ibn, but
I think
go ahead, Reverend, jump in.
That's
the point of the program. Go ahead, jump in. Go ahead.
Well, secularism is not only secularism. I would say atheistic secularism, which is the problem. I am a secular priest. I believe in the separation between the state and religion. But what is the problem in the West is that secularism is an anti-religion secularism. And this is what is posing the biggest threat to Christianity, even in the West.
Okay, Ibn, weigh in on that because of this belief in secularism here, in replacing it with replacing Christianity here. Christians now are of a lesser God per se, because you wouldn't say that about Islam, because then you'd be called a racist or a bigot or something like that. But if you do attack Christianity,
Islamophobe.
Or Islamophobe. But if you attack Christianity, you're just that's okay. All right, that gives you credentials.
That's okay. Absolutely.
Okay.
Fine.
Let me go to Ibn.
Yes.
Let me go to Ibn in Copenhagen. Go ahead.
But I just think it's very important to keep in mind that that democracy has replaced Christianity, and democracy is sacred, and has created a sort of new religion. And the driving force of this has an anti-Christian agenda, and you see it all over the world. It's very irrational that the West do not want to help Christians in the Middle East, and they just turn the blind eye to it. It is irrational, and that's why you need to understand that
this is just a misrepresentation of
there
what's
is
going on.
a spiritual perspective here, not only a political and economical, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. The West is very occupied with human rights and people who are harassed and tortured and persecuted everywhere else, but not the Christians, because the Christians, the West has a sort of self-hatred. And I mean, in the West, there is this hatred, this rage against God, the biblical God, not the other gods, but the biblical God. And to me, liberal democracy is all about tearing down Christian morals and Christian faith. And you see it all over the world.
Okay. Jeffrey, I mean, you said that you see that there is an awareness of it. You mentioned media in Europe here. But, you know, if they were aware of it, but do people understand the causality of it here? Because the more the more the U.S. and its allies destroy these regimes in the Middle East, the less religious tolerance there is. I mean, you know, bringing democracy to the Middle East hasn't done Christians very well in the region. I'm sure you would agree with me on that.
No, I agree completely. I mean, the problem is people who still are adhering to very strong religious beliefs where there's been no tradition of secularism, and the answer to the problem is secularism. Unfortunately, we overthrew, as I was saying before, Saddam, who was a secular regime, and the same situation obtains in Syria, where you have a minority, Alawite Shiite regime which has an interest in preserving secularism. The same thing was true for Saddam, a Sunni, in a largely Shiite country. So there is awareness of I'm sure that people are aware in the United States broadly that Christians have suffered a lot since the Iraq invasion in 2003. But the problem is that about 1 million Iraqis have died since then. for one reason or another related to the war.
Yes,
the flood of humanity that is dying.
Jeff, you were completely agreeing there. But my point is that if there's an awareness, agreed. But there's no follow-up. There's nothing people want to do about it. It's very sad. It's unfortunate. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think they want. No, but I don't see whether people want to do much of anything at least in the capitals of the West. Except try to put an end, at the moment, to the flow of refugees into Europe, which includes Christians, of course. But no, I think that there's no more of a plan to save the Christians than there is to save the Muslims who have suffered under for the past 13 years.
Okay, Reverend, if I can go to you, I mean, it seems to me just a change of policy and a lot of people would be saved, okay? First of all, Christians wouldn't be persecuted and Muslims wouldn't want to have to leave where they leave because America and their allies are bombing democracy to them, okay? I mean, it's Western foreign policy that is agonizing everybody in the region. Go ahead.
In America, if you look at the website of the State Department, they said that they dropped Christians as victims of ISIS. We are not victims of ISIS any longer. And that was the biggest joke I read online. It is. I'm sure it is still on the website of the State Department in Washington. And I want to highlight something. That democracy is a very elastic concept. There is nothing called democracy. Democracy is like water. It takes the shape of the pot that it is in it. So that you can't impose democracy on anybody. It has to emerge from the society. It takes the shape of the society. Because if you look at Europe, the English democracy is very different from the French democracy or German democracy. Why would Syria or Iraq have to adopt a ready-made like a mold of democracy? It has to emerge from the society. Otherwise, it becomes a problem rather than a solution.
I have to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break here, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Christians in the Middle East. Stay with our team. I'd like to go back to Ibn in Copenhagen. The Reverend gave us a startling a statement here at the end of the first part of the program. I'll give you another one here. The State Department's 2015 sex trafficking report devotes barely 2 paragraphs out of 380 pages to the Islamic State's institutionalization of sex slavery. That's really extraordinary. I mean, if something like that was happening in California or in France, there would be volumes and volumes and volumes written about it. But here are a couple of paragraphs. I mean, that's just turning a blind eye to the fate of people that the West is largely responsible. Go ahead, Ibn.
Yes, but that's exactly my point. It's completely irrational. And nobody understands why. If you try to understand and you read articles about this problem, you won't get any answer. And that's why I want to stress there is a spiritual dimension in this. And I think on the surface, it looks like that the West and Islamic State are on the opposite side in the conflict. But actually, they are spiritually, they agree in their war on Christians. And I think they have a kind of unholy but tacit alliance to eliminate Christians. And I think Christians, especially Christians in the world, needs to be more aware that there is this anti-Christian spirit roaming around in the West. And that's why they're turning the blind eye to this problem, because I can't find any other explanations. I mean, to understand what's going on in the world today, you need to address the spiritual dimension. You can't understand the world today if you only try to look for political explanations. It's simply not possible.
Okay,
you won't get the full picture.
Okay, Reverend Nadim and Jeffrey are both disagreeing with you. Jeffrey, go ahead in Moscow first. Go ahead.
I can't. It's difficult to respond to that sort of wild, ludicrous accusation. The most I can say is that there's no evidence of any war being waged against Christians or any desire to eliminate Christianity. The problem came about because the United States overthrew...
Jeffrey, but you would agree that the Islamic State has essentially declared war on Christians in the area that they control.
Definitely.
Okay, well, that is one declaration of war, okay?
Okay, but not the West.
No,
I think the point is that the West is indifferent.
With the United States.
Go ahead, finish your point. I'm sorry, Jeff, finish your point. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. The accusation just made was that the West was complicit with ISIS. That's ridiculous. In this case, there's absolutely no reason to think that the West is targeting Christians in the same way that ISIS is targeting them, exterminating them, using them as sex slaves and whatnot. The problem is secularism, the absence of secularism that began with the overthrow of Saddam Hussein and spread into two-thirds of Syria now.
Okay, Reverend Nadim, you were agreeing or disagreeing on some point. Go ahead, jump in.
No, but I mean...
No, let me go to
every
London. Fair time, everybody. Let's go to London. Go ahead.
I think there is no direct war launched against Christianity, neither by ISIS nor by the West. But ISIS is in a state of war with anything which is different from itself. So it's not about Christianity. Yazidis are not Christians. And some of the Sunnis are being persecuted and beheaded because they oppose ISIS. So let's not, put it in such a dramatic way. But in the West, there is, yes, Peter, there is an indifference about religion. And yes, there is this atheistic secularism that is very much aggressive against Christianity, because there is this saying that the Western societies and cultures are based on Christian thoughts and Christian principles. And the people are not very comfortable with that, because they want to get away with this background, Christian background. Angela Merkel, the chancellor in Germany, said a couple of years ago in the Bundestag, she said that Christianity is the most persecuted religion in the world.
It is. It is.
And the Bundestag, and the Bundestag was very uncomfortable about it. But she said, this is the truth. And I think this is the truth. But I have to say a bold statement here. If Christianity disappears from the Middle East, that means Islam will have proven to the world that it is a religion that does not live with the other. And this is dangerous, because nobody wants Islam to be in this image. But if the Muslims worldwide allow Christianity to disappear from the Middle East, then they are all, for me, accused of allowing this Islam to be in this image, that it is intolerant and it doesn't live with the other who is different.
And let me stress it here, in that image, Reverend, as you pointed out right there. If I go back to Ibn in Copenhagen, I mean, you were mentioning, democracy and all that. And one of the interesting things is that, unfortunately for the world, I would say, and I'm very curious what Jeff will have to say about this, is that for the United States, democracy is a religion. It is a secular religion for the Americans. It's sacred here. But for a good part of the world, fortunately, it's only a process and a procedure. It's not considered sacred. And this is one of the problems that the U.S. has with its view of the world. It has this kind of missionary motivation to save the world. And doing that, which I find really quite remarkable, the more the U.S. promotes democracy in regions like the world, in the Middle East, for example, the more religious tolerance disappears, and the more the greater possibility, as Reverend has pointed out, is that Christianity could completely die out. And that doesn't say much good about that particular image of Islam here. Jeff, you want to weigh in there about democracy?
Yeah, I disagree that democracy is a religion. If it is in the United States, if it is, it's a very imperfectly practiced one. What counts here is secularism.
Yes,
again,
absolutely.
Secularism, Islam does provide for people of the book, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, to live together with Christians and Jews having subservient status, having dhimmi status, paying a tax, which is not what we understand by democracy. In a secular society, you could profess any religion you want, including polytheistic religions like Hinduism, and not be touched. The point is law, the rule of law, not the rule of myths or ancient fables or religions. We've put that beside. If you want to believe in religion, go ahead and do it. Do it on your own time, in your own place. You can have your church. The first point of freedom of expression, as you know from the First Amendment in the United States, is that the state shall not make any laws abridging religion. The state will not establish a religion, that is. So you can definitely practice religion. It's another thing entirely whether public opinion is turning against 2 millennia of abuse from Christians in the West. Now, the problem here, we're talking about the Middle East, though, and there the problem is that we've unleashed this anarchy through invading Iraq, and we almost managed to do that with Syria 2 years ago when Obama said President Assad has to go. If he had, we would have millions of more refugees now. We would have the Islamic State with a border with Israel, and we might be in a major war at this point. The point is secularism, which at the moment Bashar al-Assad is maintaining in his part his 1/3 of Syria that he still controls. The answer here is secularism, not wild accusations of war made against Western governments, complicity with ISIS. That's nonsense.
Okay, but Ibn, I mean, what Jeffrey said there about secularism is all nice and fine, but if you live in the Middle East, that's not the case. You cannot practice your faith as you wish in public here. And if you do...
No, it's not the case.
Okay, Reverend, jump in.
We
Go
don't
ahead.
have secularism.
Go ahead.
We don't have secularism in the Middle East. In the Middle East, we breathe religion. We live. It's invading every single details of our lives.
That's right.
Before we talk about secularism in the Middle East, we need to talk about the abuse of religion. We need to free religion from being hijacked for sick ideologies and for sick politics. And because of that, we don't talk about secularism in the Middle East because the people are religious by nature, by DNA. So when we talk about secularism in the West, please don't take that and implement it in the Middle East as if it is a fait accompli.
Well,
it is not.
One size fits all. One size fits all, Jeff. Huh? That's what the Reverend is saying. It does. One size doesn't fit all. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, I was just saying that the root of this problem is the overthrow of secular regimes, or the overthrow of the Saddam regime, which was secular at least up until
they were
the
not
first Gulf
secular
War.
regimes. There are not secular regimes.
But
are
basically,
regimes that
yes, we understand.
are happy to abuse anything to stay in the power.
Listen, the point is that Shiites and Sunnis were able to live side by side because Sunnis were in the minorities. So there was a reason for not promoting Sunnism, which would have started a sectarian war. Now, after the first Gulf War, things began to change. Saddam became more religious. But the answer to this, I agree that people live and breathe religion. That's the problem in the Middle East. The answer to this is the rule of law and democracy and secularism. I'm sorry,
I'm
like a broken record here, but the truth is very simple, and it exists in some parts of the world and not much in the Middle East, obviously.
Jeff, if I can go to Ibn here, again, in an ideal world, I understand exactly where you're coming from, but the U.S. is doing exactly that, and its allies, bringing these ideas and these institutions to the Middle East, and what it is doing is crushing everybody in their way, okay? And it's given fuel, oxygen to some of the most noxious people on the planet, like ISIS and Al-Qaeda here. I mean, the promotion of democracy has had a very negative consequence. Ibn, I'm going to give you the last word on the program, dear. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I think the biggest problem for the West is that it has lost its Christian faith because it needs the moral foundation. And I think in the confrontation with Islam, we see that the West is getting weaker and weaker because it has no spiritual foundation. And this is a kind of spiritual war. It's not only a political war. And I think that it is the first time in history that the West has to face Islam without a Christian context. And we can see every day that Europe is getting weaker and weaker and will not win the fight over Islam. And I also have to say to the two gentlemen here that the goal of Islamic State is actually to conquer Rome, because they want to go to Rome and they want to govern in the place.
Okay,
which is
on that note there, on that note, we have to wrap up here. We've run out of time. Many thanks to my guests in Copenhagen, London, and here in Moscow. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time